Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be continuing our series on the Evans Gambit, looking at part 2. We're going to pick up right here at the Evans Gambit, and after the bishop takes on b4 and we move c3, he moves back to a5, common line. We're going to be going over another situation that black can do, and we move our pawn to d4. If he captures and we castle, let's say this time he doesn't want to take on c3. I actually think for black, I would not recommend taking on c3, because white's going to get that material back, and at the same time he's going to have tempo as he develops his pieces. It's going to be pretty tough for black in the long run, I think. From here, let's say black does a move like b6, putting his bishop in a much better square, and at the same time defending this pawn on d4, putting a lot of pressure on the center. After white captures on d4, now black can play a move like d6, and it does a couple things here. This position's a little bit different as it was before. White now, queen to b3, it's not going to be as effective because now the knight can come to a5. If you remember from the first video, this was not good for black because after bishop to f7, the king here, when we moved our queen to a4 and the king captured, before we could come and capture this knight on a5. But now, as you can see, this bishop on b6 is actually protecting this knight. So queen to b3 is not going to be our best move. But it's a good idea to know when it's a good move and when it's not, so you don't always put your queen on b3 expecting it to work out. Instead, knight to c3, simple development move, at the same time controlling key squares, controlling this square on d5 and at the same time controlling this pawn on e4. Now from here, black would really like to castle kingside, and he has two options. First, he has to get his knight out of the way. We've already seen how knight to h6 is a bad move in the first video. He has two options. He can bring his knight to e7, which seems logical. He's putting another defender on his knight on c6. They can switch places if they need to if one gets captured. Or his other one is knight to f6. The first one, if you do see knight to e7, know that this is a mistake, because white can now bring his knight to g5, attacking this pawn on f7. The only move that black has to defend this is if he moves castle. From here, white can bring his queen to h5, and this is going to smell disaster for black. The only way he can defend this is if he tries to bring his pawn to h6. From here, we can bring our knight to f7. We're attacking this queen. If he gives up his queen, it's going to be a pretty easy game for us, as y'all can probably tell. Let's say he tries to move his queen to e8 to get out of the way. We now have a discovered attack. It's a double check now. Anytime a king is double check, he has to move his king. It doesn't matter which one he goes. If he goes to h7 or h8, let's just put him on h7. Now we can bring our knight back. His king is forced to move to g8. And now it's simple checkmate. So that's not going to be good for black. So e7 is a huge mistake. If you see this, make sure that you take advantage of it. Instead of e7 though, you may see knight to f6. Now knight to f6, what we're going to do is we're going to continue up the board with our pawns. Pawn to e5, putting a lot of pressure on black here. We want to make sure that black cannot castle kingside. If he takes, he can't castle yet, because if he castles, we'll just take his knight. That's not going to be good. If he does take with his pawn, we're not going to recapture it. You always want to put pressure on your opponent when you can, especially in the Evans Gambit. We're giving up material in this opening to put as much pressure as we can on our opponents. From here, we're not going to first take this. Instead, we're going to bring our bishop to a3, putting a lot of pressure on king to castle. Now, if he takes our pawn, we can bring our rook to e1. We're going to be putting, as you can tell, even more and more pressure on the black king. Black's going to have a really hard time now to develop his king side safety. And as you can tell, all of our pieces, now we can bring our queen to b3. As you can tell, all of our pieces are starting to work together and they're all developed. This is ample compensation for the material advantage that black has, because white has center control, he has great development, and all his pieces are aimed right at the king. So this is very good for white. The other opening I did want to talk about, we've talked about if the bishop moves back to a5, and if he moves to e7. Also want to talk about in the Evans Gambit when he captures and our pawn comes to c3, if he moves his bishop back to c5. A lot of players that aren't too familiar with the Evans Gambit as black, you may see them play this. From here, we're going to bring our pawn to d4. If he now captures with his pawn, we're attacking his bishop, so I would recommend that he takes with his pawn and his bishop. But we can bring our pawn to d4, and his bishop's now going to have to move, and you may see a similar situation that you did before if he brings his bishop back to b6. But as you can tell, after he moves his bishop, he's going to be losing time in development. We can castle kingside. We can now bring our bishop, queen into the action to b3, depending on where his bishop is. We can bring our knight to c3. We have great center control, great development, and this is going to be very good. We're down one pawn in material, but as you can see, this is a very aggressive opening, and we have ample compensation for the pawn down. So, this is the Evans Gambit. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you do play the Gioco piano, I highly recommend playing the Evans Gambit. It's very, very good for white, and there's a lot of ideas that even if it doesn't play out exactly like some of these examples, you can still have a lot of very good attacking ideas from the Evans Gambit and have a lot of easy wins against players that aren't too familiar with it. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Check out the website, www.thechesswebsite.com, and I will see you guys next video. Thanks for watching, everybody.